The call that every military parent dreads didn't come to me. It went to my commanding officer first. I was in Germany, thousands of miles from my boys. And the first thing I heard was, "Your son has committed a felony assault. You need to get home, now." My son, my 14-year-old boy who cried when he stepped on a spider. They said he'd beaten his father's new wife unconscious. At their wedding, in front of everyone. I thought I knew what horror felt like. I thought I knew what fear was. But that 18-hour flight home, that was a special kind of hell. I was prepared to see a monster. I was prepared to see a stranger wearing my child's face. What I wasn't prepared for was the truth. A truth so ugly, so devastating, that it would tear my family apart and put my own freedom on the line. This isn't just a story about what my son did. This is a story about why. And the moment he told me was the moment the war really began. The jet lag was a physical weight, a leaden blanket wrapped around my bones, but the adrenaline was a live wire sparking underneath my skin. I didn't go home. I went straight from the airport to Conrad's house, the house that used to be our house, the one with the blue shutters and the rose bushes I'd planted that were now probably dead. My rental car crunched to a halt in the driveway, and there it was, a dark rust-brown stain on the concrete near the garage. It wasn't just a stain. It was a Rorschach test of violence. My mind, trained for combat, immediately calculated the size, the splatter pattern. It was a lot of blood. My stomach turned to stone. The doorbell echoed like a gunshot in the quiet street. The door swung open, and there was Conrad. His face, usually so smug and composed, was a twisted mask of pure, undiluted rage. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask about my flight. "We're pressing charges," he spat. The words hitting me like thrown gravel. He's an animal. They're trying him as an adult. I didn't flinch. The soldier in me took over, assessed the situation, secure the perimeter. "I'm not taking anyone's side until I see both," I said, my voice colder than I felt. I pushed past him, my boots echoing on the familiar hardwood floor. The living room was a tribunal of betrayal. Conrad's parents on the couch, their faces pinched with disapproval. His brother, Potter, trying to look imposing by the fireplace. His sister, Fen, wringing her hands in the corner. And the bride's parents, standing like sentinels of judgment. In the center of it all, on a single chair pulled from the dining set, was Lauren. Her face was a nightmare, a splintered nose, two spectacular black eyes that were already blooming into shades of purple and yellow, bandages across her cheek. She was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, each sob a performance of perfect victimhood. And then I saw him. Surrounded by this mob of angry adults, sat my son, my Ben. He sat ramrod straight, his chin held high. His knuckles were bruised and swollen, the skin split. But it was his eyes that stole the air from my lungs. They weren't the eyes of a scared boy. They weren't the eyes of a remorseless monster. They were the eyes of a soldier who had just returned from a tour in hell. They were clear, defiant, and proud. "Your son destroyed our family," Conrad hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Lauren. "Look what he did to her face. Look." Lauren sobbed louder, a grating theatrical sound. I ignored them. I walked straight to my boy and knelt in front of him, putting my hands on his knees. "Ben," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Talk to me." The room erupted. "Don't you coddle him. He's a liar. He's violent." Ben's gaze never left mine. He took a slow, deep breath, then let his eyes sweep around the room, taking in every single face. His grandfather, who taught him to fish. His aunt, who used to sneak him candy. His father, who had promised to protect him. He looked at each one of them with a chilling, ancient calm. Then he spoke, and his voice was clear and steady, cutting through the noise like a knife. "You want to know the truth?" he said, not to me, but to all of them. "She's been molesting me for 6 months. That's why I did it. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a world breaking. Liar! Conrad's roar was the first sound, raw and guttural. He took a step toward Ben, and I was on my feet in an instant, placing my body between my son and his father. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs. Lauren's performance reached an Oscar-worthy crescendo, a wail of pure manufactured agony. How could you? I've been nothing but loving to you. I treated you like my own. Her mother surged forward, her face a contorted mask of fury, finger pointed like a weapon at my son. You evil little shit, she screamed, but her husband, Lauren's father, grabbed her arm, his grip tight. His face was ashen, his eyes wide not with anger, but with a dawning, horrifying recognition. Patricia, stop, he muttered, his voice hollow. That's when I saw it. The crack. For just a fraction of a second, before the waterworks really turned on, Lauren's face had shifted. The performative pain had slipped, and in its place was a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. She'd been caught. She knew it. In the midst of the chaos, Conrad sputtering, the grandparents gasping, Lauren's mother being restrained. My son moved with a calm that terrified me. He pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands, those bruised boyish hands, were steady as he swiped and tapped, navigating to a hidden folder. She said, 14-year-old boys always want it, Ben said, his voice flat, robotic, as if reciting a fact sheet from a nightmare. Said I should be grateful. He turned the screen toward me. I saw the images over his shoulder. My training, my combat experience. Nothing could have prepared me for this. It wasn't the explicit content alone, though that was vile enough. It was the context. Our living room couch, the blanket I'd bought him for Christmas. His face, not excited, not willing, but frozen. Eyes wide with a terror so profound it turned my blood to ice. My stomach revolted. I pressed a hand to my mouth, forcing the bile back down. Conrad's hands were shaking violently as he stared at the screen, his rage momentarily stunned into silence. Those could be anyone, he stammered. But his voice was hollow, empty. He was reading lines from a script he no longer believed. Could have been. Photoshopped. Lauren lunged from her chair, a desperate, clumsy grab for the phone. Those are out of context. I was just. She stopped dead. The room went silent again. She just admitted they were real. My son stood up. The calm shattered. Now his voice shook with a rage so potent, it vibrated in the air. He wasn't talking to me anymore. He was addressing his jury. Dad, he said, turning to Conrad, his words sharp and precise. I told you, 3 months ago. I came to you and I told you she was touching me. You said, his voice broke for the first time. You said she was just being affectionate. That I was lucky. Conrad started stuttering, backing away as if Ben's words were physical blows. I thought. Ben's eyes swept to his grandfather. Grandpa, you laughed. You said, wish I had that problem at 14. The old man's face drained of all color. He looked from his grinning, bruised daughter-in-law to his shattered grandson, and something in him crumbled. He looked down at his hands. Aunt Fen, Ben continued, his voice gaining strength with every confession he dragged into the light. You told me, don't be dramatic. You'll ruin your father's happiness. Fen let out a small whimper, pressing her rosary beads to her lips. Uncle Potter, you said I should be grateful. A woman like her would even look at me. Potter, the big tough guy by the fireplace, put his head in his hands. Jesus Christ, Ben, I was joking. I didn't know she was actually... Grandma, Ben said, his final word landing like a judge's gavel. You said boys can't be raped by women, that it's not possible. Grandma collapsed into the couch cushions, her prayers now silent tears streaming down her face. Every single one of you, Ben said, emphasizing each word. You told me to shut up about it. Lauren's parents were having a hissed, frantic argument in the corner. Her father's voice, low and desperate, carried across the room. Not again, Patricia. You said she was better. You promised me. Again. The word hung in the air, toxic and heavy. I felt a cold dread, colder than anything I'd ever felt, begin to creep up my spine. This was worse than I imagined. It was systematic. It was a conspiracy of silence. But then Ben looked at me, and his expression changed. The anger bled away, leaving something worse, something utterly broken. But that's not why I hit her, he said. The room, which had been holding its breath, collectively froze. What do you mean that's not why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ben's composure finally shattered. The tears came then, not quiet sobs, but ugly, gasping, heart-wrenching heaves that shook his entire body. Last week, I caught her, coming out of Tommy's room. At 2 a.m., he choked out. He's 9. The air left my lungs. Tommy, Conrad's son with his first wife. A sweet, quiet little boy who loved dinosaurs and origami. Ben's little brother. Lauren's mask of victimhood finally completely slipped away. Her bruised face twisted into a snarl of pure contempt. That little brat came on to me. He's always following me around. Conrad moved faster than I thought possible. He grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her. What did you just say? For the first time, real fear flashed in Lauren's eyes. She knew she'd gone too far. Ben was crying uncontrollably now. The morning of your wedding, Dad, I begged you. I said we had to talk. You said, not today. You pushed me away. I knew nothing I said would stop you from marrying her. I knew she'd have access to him forever. So I stopped her. The only way I could. Then, before anyone could move or speak, my son, my brave, broken, magnificent boy, ran upstairs. We heard his footsteps down the hall. He came back down, carrying a sleepy, confused Tommy, who buried his face in Ben's neck. Tommy, Ben said, his voice gentle now, soothing his brother. It's okay. You can tell them. Did Lauren touch you? The little boy, his eyes wide with fear, nodded against Ben's shoulder. Show them, buddy. Show them the marks. And in that horrible, silent living room, surrounded by adults who had failed him, little Tommy pulled up his pajama shorts. There, on his inner thighs, were faint yellowing bruises in the shape of fingerprints. Lauren's mother screamed, but this time it wasn't at us. It was at her daughter. You promised. You went to therapy. You promised this would never happen again. Again. Lauren just stood there, all pretense gone, her face a map of bruises and contempt. My son looked at the room, at every adult who had chosen their comfort over his safety. We're just children, he said, his voice quiet and final. And every adult in this room chose her over us. I already had my phone out. My fingers, numb with shock, dialed the one number that mattered, 911. The room erupted into a new kind of chaos. Begging, pleading, offers to drop the charges. But I wasn't listening. I gave the dispatcher the address, my voice steady as I reported a sexual assault on a minor. That's when Lauren ran. She bolted down the hall and locked herself in the downstairs bathroom. I didn't care. Let her hide. The police were on their way. 10 minutes later, she came out, just as the flashing blue and red lights lit up the driveway windows. Her face was strangely calm, resigned even. The police took her away without a struggle. I gathered my sons, my brave Ben, and my traumatized Tommy, and I drove us to my best friend's house. We were safe, for now, but 2 hours later, as I was tucking Tommy into a strange bed, my phone rang. It was the detective from the precinct. Mom. His voice was grave. All business. We need you to come down to the station immediately. My blood ran cold. Why? Is it about Lauren? The charges. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Just come down now, ma'am. And you might want to bring a lawyer. I drove to the police station with my stomach in knots, the detective's ominous tone echoing in my head. They led me straight to a cold, sterile interrogation room, not the comfortable office I'd expected. The detective slid a manila folder across the metal table. "We need you to take a look at these," he said, his eyes watching my every reaction. We found them on the suspect's phone. My hands were trembling as I opened the folder. Inside were screenshots of text messages between me and Lauren. My blood ran cold as I read them. They showed me, just a few months ago, telling her she could handle my son however she needed to while I was deployed. One message said I trusted her judgment completely about discipline. Another said teenage boys needed firm boundaries, and I was counting on her to provide them. I stared at words I had never written, sentences I had never formed. The timestamps placed them right around the time Ben first tried to tell Conrad. The detective's voice was careful, neutral. "Ma'am, did you or did you not give Lauren permission to discipline your son physically?" He let the question hang in the air for a beat before delivering the next one, the one that made the room spin. "And did you give her permission to engage in sexual contact with him as a form of teaching?" Lauren hadn't just hidden in that bathroom. She planted evidence, and her backup plan was to drag me down with her. The detective's questions hung in the air, toxic and suffocating. Sexual contact as a form of teaching. The words didn't just sound wrong. They felt like a violation all their own. I could only stare at him, my mouth agape, my mind scrambling to find purchase in this new, horrifying reality. "No." I finally managed, the words scraping out of my dry throat. "Absolutely not. I never sent those. I would never, ever say anything like that. Those are fake." The detective, a man with weary eyes, and a nameplate that read Vasquez, just nodded slowly, jotting something down on his notepad. He didn't look convinced. He looked like he'd heard it all before. "We'll need to verify that," he said, his tone flat. "We'll need your phone for comparison. Forensic analysis." The world tilted. My phone, my lifeline to my boys, to my command, to my lawyer. My entire life was on that device. And they wanted to take it, to dissect it, looking for a crime I didn't commit. "Take it," I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by a surge of defiant anger. I slid it across the table. "Pull the records from the carrier. They'll prove I never contacted her from that number. Please, do it." He took the phone and placed it in an evidence bag. The crinkle of the plastic, sounding unnaturally loud in the silent room. "We will, but that process takes time." Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He stood up. "If you'll come with me, ma'am." He led me out of the interrogation room and down a narrower, colder hallway that smelled of stale coffee, an industrial cleaner. He opened a door to a different kind of room. This one had a bright light, a camera mounted on the wall, and a technician waiting with a small kit. "We need to photograph your hands," Detective Vasquez said. It wasn't a request. I held them out, palms up, then palms down. The flash was blinding. The technician then gestured to an ink pad and a stack of fingerprint cards. "I need to roll each finger, please," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. This was procedure. Standard maybe for them, but for me, as the ink was rolled onto each fingertip and pressed onto the coarse cardstock, it felt like the most profound betrayal. Each press was a stamp. Criminal, suspect, accomplice. The word accomplice echoed in my head. Lauren wasn't just trying to create reasonable doubt. She was building a narrative. The unstable, absent military mother who approved of, maybe even encouraged, the abuse of her own son. The thought was so vomitously absurd, I almost laughed. Almost. For 3 hours they asked questions. When did I meet Lauren? How often did we communicate? What did we talk about? Did I ever discuss discipline? Did I notice changes in Ben's behavior? Why hadn't I come home sooner? Every question was a trap disguised as curiosity. Why hadn't I come home sooner? The guilt they were trying to assign me already lived inside me, a squirming, poisonous thing. I should have come home sooner. I should have known, but not for the reasons they implied. Finally, they let me go, but they kept my phone, and they told me not to leave town. I walked out of the police station into the blinding afternoon sun. The world looked the same. Cars driving, people walking, birds chirping, but it wasn't. I was now a character in a nightmare story, written by a monster. I got in my rental car and sat there for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe. My friend had recommended a lawyer, Casey Maple Grove. The name sounded solid, trustworthy. I drove straight to her office, a sleek building downtown, and walked in, looking like I'd just been through a war. Maybe I had. Casey took one look at my face, pale, shell-shocked, with probably still a hint of fingerprint ink under my nails, and immediately cleared her schedule. She was a woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes, a no-nonsense bob, and an energy that screamed, "Fixer!" She sat me down in her quiet, book-lined office and handed me a bottle of water. "Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. I talked." I told her about the call, the wedding, the blood on the driveway, the tribunal in the living room, Ben's devastating revelation, Tommy's bruises, and now the fake texts. I cried. I shook. I didn't try to be strong. In this room, with this woman, I didn't have to be. Casey listened, her fingers flying across her keyboard, taking notes. When I finished, she stopped typing and looked at me. "Okay," she said, her voice calm and focused. "First, we stop talking to the police. Everything goes through me. Second, she used those 10 minutes in the bathroom well. Spoofing app, edited screenshots. Classic predator playbook. They muddy the water to create doubt. She immediately started working. She filed preservation orders with all the major phone carriers and social media companies. "We need the actual metadata from the carrier," she explained. "That's the only thing that will prove those messages were never sent from your number. We also need her search history." I'd bet my license she Googled how to fake text messages or spoofing apps. It was the first moment of clarity I'd had since walking into that interrogation room. A plan, action. The next morning, a different kind of official showed up at my friend Sarah's door. Derek Oakridge from Child Protective Services. He was a tall, gentle-faced man with a calm demeanor that seemed designed to put kids at ease. He needed to interview both boys, separately. My heart clenched. They'd already been through so much. Now they had to relive it for a stranger. But Derek was good. He sat with Ben at Sarah's kitchen table, speaking softly, never pushing. He let Ben tell his story in his own time, in his own words. He wrote everything down carefully, had Ben sign each page, making him feel believed, making his testimony official. Then it was Tommy's turn. He was scared, hiding behind my legs. Derek got down on his knees, talking about dinosaurs until Tommy peeked out. He interviewed him in Sarah's living room, away from everyone else. Tommy, in his small, hesitant voice, confirmed everything. He showed Derek the fading bruises on his thighs. Derek took photographs, documenting each one with a clinical precision that was both horrifying and necessary. After the interviews, Derek sat with me. "I'm implementing a safety plan," he said, his voice kind but firm. "It means, for now, your contact with the boys will need to be supervised. At the CPS office, with a social worker present, the humiliation was a hot flush on my skin. I needed supervision to see my own son, the son I'd crossed an ocean to protect, but I swallowed my pride. Their safety was all that mattered. "Okay," I said. "Whatever you need. Derek explained that the criminal case against Lauren was solid. The boys' stories were credible, consistent, and backed by physical evidence. But he also warned me. Her defense will use those fake messages to paint you as negligent, or worse. Be ready. Over the next few days, life became a bizarre and painful routine. Casey got the phone records. The metadata proved I'd never sent those texts. She also found Lauren's search history, how to fake text messages for court, best spoofing apps. Can deleted texts be recovered? The police dropped their investigation into me. I was no longer a suspect, just a witness. I should have felt relieved, but the damage was done. My phone rang. A military number. Colonel Briggs from JAG. My security clearance was under review. My emergency leave was extended, but I was placed on administrative hold. I couldn't return to duty. My career, my life's work, was frozen solid because of Lauren's lies. I sat in my car after that call, watching the world go by, feeling utterly unmoored. I was a soldier without a unit, a mother who needed supervision to see her child. Casey called, her voice buzzing with a new discovery. The fake screenshots Lauren made, the font is wrong for your phone model. The timestamps are formatted differently. It's sloppy work. I've got a digital forensic expert, Corey, looking at it now. We're going to tear this apart. Meanwhile, I took Tommy for his medical exam at the Children's Hospital. A necessary brutal invasion to document the truth. When we got to the exam room, they told me I had to wait in the hallway. I will never forget the sight of my little boy, so small and scared, walking into that sterile room with only a nurse and a doctor. I paced that linoleum floor for 3 hours, my heart hammering against my ribs. The nurse brought him juice boxes, and each time the door opened, I caught a glimpse of him sitting on the exam table in a tiny hospital gown, looking lost. When they finally finished, he came out clutching a stuffed bear the nurse had given him. He wouldn't look at me. The doctor spoke to me in careful clinical terms. Findings consistent with the disclosed history. The medical jargon couldn't hide the horror. It was all there, documented in a thick folder. My phone buzzed incessantly. Voicemails from Conrad. His messages were a roller coaster of denial, rage, and blame. First message, this is your fault. You turned him against her. Second message, how could she do this? She's a monster. Third message, he ruined my life. He ruined everything. Fourth message, why didn't you warn me? You must have known. His parents called too. I deleted their messages without listening. Then came the next blow. Lauren made bail. Her parents paid it. And within hours, her lawyer had filed a restraining order against me. The paperwork claimed I'd orchestrated the entire thing, that I was a jealous ex-wife who had coached my son to attack Lauren and Tommy to lie, all to get custody. She was painting herself as the victim. Casey was furious. This is textbook DARPA, she spat. Deny, attack, reverse perpetrator and victim. Don't worry, we'll fight this. But fighting took time. And money. The retainer I'd given Casey was already draining away. My military pay was on hold. The cost of this nightmare was already skyrocketing, and we were just getting started. The next morning was Ben's official interview with Derek at the Children's Advocacy Center. I sat in a waiting room, designed to be cheerful, with bright murals and toys, and listened to the silence from the interview room, knowing my son was in there, reliving his hell for the official record. He emerged hours later, pale and drained, but he held his head high. Derek told me his testimony was flawless. He remembered dates, times, what people were wearing, what was on TV. He had created a damning timeline of every adult who had failed him. The safety plan meant a strange and heartbreaking new routine. I could see the boys at Sarah's house, but only during approved hours. I'd arrive at 7 a.m. to get them ready for school, leave when the bus came, and return at 3 p.m. when they got home. I had to leave again at 8 p.m. sharp. The 8 p.m. curfew was the worst. That's when Tommy's nightmares kicked in. Sarah would text me updates. He's crying for you. He had a bad dream about her, but I couldn't go back. I'd sit in my dark rental car down the street, feeling like I was abandoning him all over again. We lived like this for weeks, in a state of suspended animation, waiting for court dates, for investigations, for the wheels of justice to grind forward. Then, an email arrived from Tommy's school counselor. She'd pulled his records, and what she found made me sick to my stomach. Clear, documented changes starting 6 months ago, right when Lauren moved in. His grades had dropped from A's to C's. He'd gone from perfect attendance to 12 absences. Teacher notes, withdrawn, stops participating in class, falls asleep at his desk. The counselor had even called Conrad, and Conrad had dismissed it. He's just adjusting to having a new stepmom. All the red flags, all the cries for help, documented and ignored, while that monster was hurting him in the room down the hall. I forwarded the email to Casey, my hands shaking with a fresh wave of rage and guilt. This was the proof. This was the pattern. She wrote back immediately. This is powerful. This shows premeditation and ongoing harm. It was a small victory in a vast ocean of pain. But it was a victory. We were building our case, brick by painful brick. But then Casey forwarded me another email, and the water turned icy again. The detective had found a voice memo on Lauren's phone, a recording of me. It was me, my voice, supposedly threatening to destroy Lauren's life if she married Conrad. The detective said it sounded convincing. Case's message was simple. Don't panic. It's another fake. We'll have Corey analyze it. We'll get the original file. I stared at the email, the world shrinking to the glow of the screen. She hadn't just faked texts. She had faked my voice. How far would this woman go? And how much of my life would she be able to destroy before someone finally stopped her? The email about the voice memo glowed on my screen, a digital ghost of a threat I'd never made. My voice. She hadn't just written words for me. She'd put them in my mouth. The violation felt deeper, more intimate. It was one thing to say forged words, another to hear a distorted version of yourself, plotting harm. Casey's instructions were clear. Do not panic. It's a fake. But the command was easier issued than followed. Panic wasn't an emotion. It was a physical state. A cold sweat on the back of my neck, a tremor in my hands that I couldn't still. Corey, the digital forensic expert, was on it. He demanded the original file, not a copy, and got to work the moment it landed in his inbox. The waiting was an agony. My life was now measured in the spaces between legal developments. The administrative hold from the military wasn't just a pause. It was a limbo. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the periphery of my children's days, watching the clock until I had to leave them each night. The first crack in the facade came from an unexpected source. Casey forwarded me an email, marked confidential, from Lauren's own father. The subject line alone made my breath catch. Previous incident. The email was carefully worded, vetted by a lawyer, no doubt, but the message was clear. He admitted there had been an incident with a neighbor's child 5 years ago. The family had moved states shortly afterward. He was sorry for our pain, but, and there was always a but, he wanted immunity from any potential charges before he would give us more details. My initial reaction was a white-hot fury. Immunity? He'd known, and he'd let his daughter marry a man with 2 young boys. He'd stood in that living room and called my son evil, all while carrying this secret. Casey's commentary was clipped and professional. We'd need the prosecutor's approval for any immunity deal. That could take weeks. It's a play for leverage. Leverage. Everything was a negotiation. My children's trauma was a bargaining chip. The first real battle happened at the restraining order hearing. I walked into the courtroom believing truth was a shield. I was naive. Casey argued passionately, presenting the metadata from the phone company, the reports from Derek at CPS, the medical documentation from the hospital. She painted a picture of a desperate predator, lashing out with lies. Lauren's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, presented his narrative. The jealous, unstable ex-wife, overseas and disconnected, who had manipulated her vulnerable son into a violent attack to destroy her ex-husband's happiness. The judge, an older man with a tired face, barely looked at our evidence. He listened to both sides, sighed, and issued a mutual no-contact order. Given the serious allegations on both sides, he said, his voice weary, the court is erring on the side of caution. Caution. The word echoed in the silent courtroom. Caution meant treating a victim and his protector as equal threats to the abuser. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand on the wooden bench and shout the truth until the windows shook. But I sat there, silent, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. The system, in its infinite caution, had just given Lauren a powerful weapon. We couldn't contact her, which was fine, but it also meant we had to be hyper-vigilant. Any accidental encounter could be twisted against us. The small victories felt like life rafts. Corey finished his analysis of the fake voice memo. His report was a thing of beautiful technical destruction. The metadata showed the file was created 2 days after Lauren claimed I'd left the message. The wave patterns were inconsistent, with background noise that abruptly changed. He found evidence of voice slicing, words cut from different sources and pasted together. Digital artifacts pointed to AI voice generation software. Casey filed the report with the court immediately. This demolishes their evidence, she said, a note of triumph in her voice. But the victory was short-lived. The legal system moved with the speed of tectonic plates. Every day of waiting was another day my children suffered. The cost was staggering. I'd already burned through $8,000 of my savings on Casey's retainer. The retainer was dwindling, and we were just getting started. I saw the invoices, the itemized hours for every phone call, every email, every document filed. Justice had a price tag, and it was one I couldn't afford. The most devastating blow came via a formal letter from my military command. My security clearance was officially suspended, pending the outcome of the investigation. The letter was dense with legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. Even if I was completely exonerated, this would be a permanent stain. 15 years of impeccable service, of deployments, of sacrifices, obliterated. My commanding officer called me personally. His voice was thick with apology. I believe you, Sergeant. Everyone here does. But my hands are tied. Protocol is protocol. Any accusation involving minors. It's automatic. I hung up the phone and looked around Sarah's living room. I'd gone from leading soldiers on a training field in Germany to being unemployed, sitting on a stranger's couch, my career in ruins. The identity I'd built my entire adult life around, soldier, protector, was gone. The emotional whiplash was constant. One moment, I'd be feeling a flicker of hope as Casey forwarded a positive email. The next, I'd be plunged back into despair. CPS began their evaluation for Tommy's long-term placement. The caseworker, a kind but overworked woman named Maria, interviewed extended family. Conrad's sister, Fen, called me. Her offer was conditional, laced with poison. I'll take him, she said, her voice tight. But only if you admit you exaggerated things. That Ben misunderstood her affection. Then Potter called with the same vile offer. The family needs to heal. We can put this behind us if you just admit you were wrong. They wanted a confession. They wanted me to betray my son, to make their guilt disappear. Maria at CPS saw right through it. Their offers are not suitable, she told me. They're conditional on denying the abuse. It shows they don't believe the children. And that's an unsafe environment. She started looking at Conrad's extended family out of state. And then she mentioned the unthinkable, therapeutic foster care. The thought of Tommy, my little boy who had already been failed by so many, being sent to live with strangers, made me physically ill. I spent a night awake, staring at the ceiling, praying for a miracle. The miracle didn't come. Instead, Conrad did. 3 weeks into this nightmare, his car screeched to a halt outside Sarah's house. I saw him from the window, his face a thundercloud of rage and entitlement. Sarah, to her eternal credit, didn't hesitate. She immediately called 911 while I ran to lock the deadbolt. Tommy! Tommy, you come out here. He's my son. Conrad's fists pounded on the door, each blow shaking the frame. I grabbed my phone and started recording, my hands shaking so badly the video was shaky. From down the hall, I could hear Tommy wailing in terror. Hiding in the bedroom closet, Ben was with him, trying to soothe him. His voice a low, steady murmur against Conrad roaring. The police arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. Conrad had kicked the door hard enough to splinter the wood around the lock. The officers made him leave, but it was a hollow victory. Without a specific restraining order, they couldn't arrest him. They just told him to go home. Sarah had to pay for a new door and a security system out of her own pocket. The incident left us all shattered. Tommy's bedwetting returned. He started having nightmares so vivid, he'd wake up screaming. Convinced Lauren was in the room. My strong, resilient Ben stopped eating. I watched him push food around his plate, his already lean frame becoming gaunt. He lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks. The stress was a visible force, crushing them both. And the legal system just kept moving, slowly, inexorably, without any regard for the small, breaking hearts caught in its gears. Casey filed emergency paperwork for a protective order, but the judge wouldn't hear it for another week. Every night, we'd all jump at the sound of a car slowing down outside. We were living under siege. The phone records finally came back, a thick stack of papers that Casey spread across her conference room table. She used a yellow highlighter, marking the relevant dates. There it was, in black and white. 0 calls, 0 texts to Lauren's number for the entire past year. This is our first solid piece of evidence against her narrative, Casey said, a real smile on her face for the first time. She filed it with the court that afternoon. It was a win, a real tangible win. I clung to it, and then Corey called with the best news yet. He'd finished his deep dive into Lauren's phone. He'd found a spoofing app, a sophisticated one, hidden in a disguised calculator folder, and the installation timestamp was 11:47 p.m. on the night of the wedding, the exact time she had locked herself in the bathroom. It's a perfect match, Corey said, his voice buzzing with excitement over the speakerphone. She installed it right then and there, and created those fake screenshots. The digital footprint is undeniable. Casey immediately forwarded everything to the prosecutor. He called back within an hour. His tone was different, less skeptical. I'm becoming less interested in pursuing any charges against you, he said, given the mounting evidence. But he wouldn't close the investigation. Not yet. It's a CYA move, Casey explained. Cover your ass. He doesn't want to be sued if something wild comes up later. But it's good. It's really good. I should have felt elated. A weight lifted. But the relief was overshadowed by the fresh hell that arrived 3 days later. It started with a notification, then another, and another. My phone, my new, clean phone with a number only a handful of people had, started blowing up. Someone had leaked the story online. My name, my photo, details only someone close to the case would know. The first messages were supportive. We believe you. Stay strong. But they quickly turned dark. Voicemails filled up with graphic death threats. My work email was flooded with vile descriptions of what people wanted to do to me. Someone posted Sarah's address online with a call to action. Let's give the baby killer what she deserves. I stood in Sarah's kitchen, watching a car slowly cruise past the house, its occupants taking pictures of us. Her children were scared to go to school. Casey helped me screenshot everything, documenting the harassment for the police. We installed more security cameras. I changed my number. Twice in 1 week, the online mob had tried and convicted me without a single fact. Lauren's narrative, her poisonous lie, had escaped the courtroom and was now hunting me in the real world. I was no longer just fighting for my son in a court of law. I was fighting for my life in the court of public opinion, and the jury was screaming for my blood. The online hate was a living thing, a digital monster that breathed threats through my phone screen and peered through Sarah's windows with every passing car. We documented everything, a grotesque collection of screenshots and voicemails that Casey added to our growing mountain of evidence. She hired a private security car to patrol the neighborhood, a surreal and expensive necessity that made our safe street feel like a war zone. In the midst of this fresh hell, a small, unexpected crack of light appeared. A letter arrived, the handwriting on the envelope shaky and unfamiliar. It was from Fen, Conrad's sister. "I'm sorry," it began. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe him. I told him not to be dramatic. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I can't sleep. It wasn't much. It didn't change what had happened. But it was the first admission of fault from anyone in that family. It was a start." Potter sent a text. Less contrite, more self-preserving, not picking sides. "Just need space from all this." Conrad's parents, however, went radio silent. They simply vanished, as if we had ceased to exist. The family was fracturing, each member dealing with their complicity in their own way. A different kind of official arrived at Sarah's house, a CPS caseworker with paperwork for Tommy's permanent placement. My heart seized. But the news wasn't what I'd feared. "The family has been approved as a therapeutic foster home," the woman said, smiling gently at Sarah. "Given the training they have and the bond Tommy has formed here, we believe this is the best place for him to begin healing." It was the first decision that felt truly right. Tommy would get to stay in the home where he felt safe, with people who had protected him without condition. He'd have structure, therapy, and the gentle company of Sarah's kids, who were teaching him card games and making him laugh again. It was a fragile peace, but it was peace. This stability for Tommy coincided with the next legal battle. Lauren's lawyer filed a motion to suppress evidence, specifically the photos Ben had on his phone. She claimed they were illegally obtained and couldn't be used in court. The motion was a masterstroke of cruelty. It meant that to keep the evidence, Ben might have to take the stand and testify in detail about how he came to possess those images. The hearing was scheduled for the following month. Meanwhile, Ben had his own day in juvenile court for the assault charges. We sat on hard wooden benches, the air smelling of lemon polish and anxiety. The judge, a stern woman with kind eyes, reviewed the diversion program offer. Therapy twice a week, 60 hours of community service at the local animal shelter. If he completed it all, his record would remain clean. The judge looked at Ben. "Do you understand the conditions of this agreement, son?" My boy, my brave, broken boy, just nodded. He couldn't speak. He signed the papers with a hand that trembled only slightly. He had traded a potential criminal record for a sentence of mandatory healing. It was a mercy, but it felt like a life sentence of remembering. The military called again. An administrative board hearing. The negative publicity from the case, they said, was affecting unit morale and base security. My security clearance was still under review, and now they were questioning the validity of my emergency leave. I had to submit pages of documents, justifying my presence at my son's side during the worst crisis of our lives. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. My career, what was left of it, was dangling by a thread. The suppression hearing for Lauren's phone evidence was a surreal experience. We sat in another courtroom, and Corey, our digital expert, was called to testify. He explained in clear technical terms the inconsistencies he'd found, the wrong timestamps, the metadata proving the files were created after she'd gone to the bathroom. Lauren's lawyer, the slick man in the expensive suit, stumbled through his cross-examination. He tried to argue technicalities, but Corey was a stone wall of facts. Lauren sat at the defense table, her bruises now faded to a sickly yellow. She kept touching her face, a calculated gesture of remembered pain. I watched her, and a cold thought settled in my stomach. This is all a performance. They rehearsed this. The judge frowned through the testimony, taking meticulous notes. After 3 hours, he said he'd rule within 2 weeks. A few days later, a certified letter arrived from CPS. They had finished their investigation. The findings were unequivocal. Lauren had abused both boys, and Conrad was found guilty of failure to protect. He was mandated to parenting classes for 6 months. Our safety plan was extended another 6 months, with surprise home visits. Something shifted in Conrad then. The anger that had been directed at us began to turn. He started showing up to the parenting classes. He sat in the back, took notes, and actually asked questions about the warning signs he'd missed. The scales were falling from his eyes, and the weight of what he saw was crushing him. He started sending short, awkward emails. "How is Tommy? Is Ben okay?" The whiplash continued. I woke up to a flood of new Facebook messages from fake accounts. They contained horrible, specific details about the case. Details only Lauren would know. Casey, ever the bloodhound, tracked the IP addresses straight back to Lauren's apartment building. We filed contempt of court charges for violating the no-contact order. Her bail was now in jeopardy. In the midst of this legal warfare, the real work of healing was beginning, slowly and painfully. Ben started trauma therapy. For the first 3 sessions, he didn't say a word. He just sat and drew pictures of birds in flight, trees with deep roots. On the 4th session, he finally spoke. "I feel dirty all the time," he whispered. The therapist, a wonderful, patient man, gave him a special scented soap to use when the feeling became overwhelming. It was a physical anchor for a psychological wound. Tommy, in his play therapy, used dolls to show what had happened. His therapist documented everything, her notes becoming part of the official record against Lauren. He was smiling more with Sarah's family, starting to feel like a kid again. The military board reviewed my case. The outcome was a mixed bag. My humanitarian leave was extended, but when I returned, I'd be placed on administrative duty. My security clearance was intact, but would be under a microscope for another 6 months. My career as a frontline soldier was over. The reprimand in my file was permanent. Any chance of promotion had evaporated. 15 years gone. I sat in my car after reading the notice and cried tears of grief for a life I'd loved and lost. Conrad's parents finally broke their silence with a single email. "We need time to process. We should have listened." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. Potter started texting again, asking if the boys needed anything. He sent gift cards for clothes and toys. A tangible, if distant, offer of peace. Then came the call from Ben's school, a conference to set up his return. We sat in a room with the principal, counselors, and a special ed coordinator. They used phrases like trauma-informed approach and modified schedule. I filled out a mountain of paperwork. He would start with half days, have a counselor check on him morning and afternoon, get extra time for tests. The principal promised confidentiality, but as we left, I saw the teachers whispering in the hallways. The story had already spread. That afternoon, I made the mistake of checking my email. The promotion list had been posted. I scrolled through the names. Friends, colleagues, people I'd trained. My name wasn't there. The final official nail in the coffin of my career. I closed the laptop. The dream of rank, of retirement, of that chapter of my life. Chaddy over, 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from Lauren's family's lawyer. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It was a settlement offer and a threat. They wanted us to sign non-disclosure agreements. In exchange, they would compensate us for our troubles. If we didn't sign, they would sue us for defamation for $2 million. The letter claimed we had damaged Lauren's reputation with false accusations. I read it twice, the audacity of it stealing the air from my lungs. I immediately called Casey. She actually laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. They're scared. This is desperation. We met at a coffee shop. Casey arrived with a stack of papers, Lauren's arrest record, the CPS findings. We're not signing anything that silences these boys, she said, her voice firm. She took a red pen to their proposed agreement. Look at this clause. They want the boys to never speak about the abuse, even in therapy. She crossed out entire pages. Over the next week, it was a negotiation with the devil. Their lawyer offered money, $50,000, then $100,000, then $200,000. Each time, Casey gave them the same answer. My clients want justice, not money. Their lawyer turned nasty. We'll bury you in legal fees, he threatened. Casey didn't blink. Try it. I work on contingency for abuse cases. She slid our counter-proposal across the table. Criminal prosecution goes forward. No NDAs. No money changes hands. The lawyer's face went red with fury, but he took the papers. The prosecutor called me with an update on Lauren's case. The news was a kick to the gut. She's been offered a plea deal, he said. 18 months. Misdemeanor assault. Misdemeanor. I choked out. She molested 2 children. Her attorney is good, he said, his voice tired. They're claiming the evidence is circumstantial. They're filing motions to get everything thrown out. It could be 8 months before we even get to trial. 8 more months of this. 8 more months of legal bills, of nightmares, of my son reliving his trauma in courtrooms. That night, around 11 p.m., my phone rang. It was Conrad. It's Tommy, he said, his voice strained. He can't sleep. She's in his dreams. I took the phone. Tommy, baby, it's me. I could hear his ragged, hitched breathing. She's here, in the dark. He whimpered. I walked him through the breathing exercises his therapist had taught him. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. We did it together, my voice a steady rhythm in his ear, until his breathing evened out and he drifted into an exhausted sleep. Conrad got back on the phone. This happens every night now, he said, and for the first time, I heard no blame in his voice, just a profound shared exhaustion. He won't sleep in his own bed. The next morning, I called Tommy's therapist for an emergency session. The legal battles were abstract. The promotions were gone. The money was bleeding away. But this, a little boy too scared to sleep, this was the real cost. This was the battlefield that mattered. And the war was far from over. The rhythm of our new life was a strange syncopated beat of trauma and routine. Ben started his community service at the animal shelter. I'd drive him there and watch him disappear into the kennels, emerging later smelling of disinfectant and dog. A quiet calm settling over him that therapy hadn't yet achieved. The animals didn't know his stories. They didn't see a victim or a perpetrator. They just saw a quiet boy with gentle hands. It was, perhaps, the most healing thing he could have done. Tommy's nightmares became our nightly ritual. My phone would ring, and it would be Conrad, his voice a low hum of exhaustion, handing the phone to a sobbing little boy. We'd do the breathing exercises together, my voice a tether, pulling him back from the edge of his terror. It was a fragile connection, a shared purpose that transcended the wreckage of our past. One morning, Casey called, her voice buzzing with a new electric energy. I filed a motion for Lauren's previous therapy records. Her family fought it, but the judge sided with us. The records from her therapist in Michigan are being sent over. The word Michigan hung in the air. Previous incident. Her father's email. This was it, the proof of a pattern. There might be other victims, Casey said. And the gravity in her voice was both horrifying and hopeful. We'd know in 2 weeks, but the system, in its infinite sluggishness, offered a fresh humiliation first. I was called into my commander's office. The formal reprimand was waiting on his desk, a single sheet of paper that felt heavier than any piece of equipment I'd ever carried. Conduct unbecoming. The words were a brand. The reason? For bringing negative attention to the unit. It was the lightest punishment they could give, but it was a permanent stain. My commander, a good man with tired eyes, looked ashamed for his institution. I fought for you, he said quietly. This was the best I could do. I signed it. My hand was steady. The soldier in me accepted the verdict. Even as the mother in me screamed in protest, I walked out of his office, knowing my service, my identity for half my life, was over. I was now a civilian in the most abrupt and inglorious way possible. The next few days were a blur of motion. Lawyer meetings, therapy appointments, school conferences. We were moving forward, but every step felt like we were dragging the immense weight of the past behind us. Then, a breakthrough. Conrad, as part of his court-mandated therapy, had a session that broke him open. The therapist's report, which CPS shared with us, was a devastating read. He admitted he'd noticed things. Months before the wedding, Lauren sitting too close to Ben during movie nights, her hand lingering on his shoulder for a beat too long. He'd seen it. His subconscious had registered the wrongness, and he'd chosen to ignore it, to explain it away. His therapy was now about confronting that failure, that willing blindness. Lauren's parents, perhaps sensing the walls closing in, showed up at Casey's office with their lawyer and a check. They wanted to settle Tommy's civil claim quietly. No court filings, no headlines. The settlement papers guaranteed Tommy's therapy would be paid for through age 21, with no session limits. The money was life-changing, but the condition was a fresh gag order. We had to sign papers promising never to speak about the settlement. We signed. For Tommy's future, we signed. Ben's return to school was a lesson in quiet cruelty. The safety plan the counselor helped us write was a good one on paper. In practice, it was a nightmare. Kids whispered as he walked down the hall. They moved away from him at lunch. The isolation was a visible cloak around him. Some mornings the anxiety was too much. He'd sit in the passenger seat of my car, shaking, unable to open the door. I'd call him in sick, and we'd try again the next day. The battle for normalcy was a daily grind. Then the call we'd been waiting for. The prosecutor. Lauren's sealed therapy records had arrived. Casey and I went to her office. The prosecutor spread the documents out. They were a chronicle of evil. 3 other kids, from her past. 3 other families. Reports that had been buried, dismissed, explained away by different therapists over the years. A pattern of predation that stretched back a decade. The prosecutor's face was grim. "We're withdrawing the plea deal," she said, her voice hard. "We're adding charges. For each prior victim, it was a victory. A massive one." Lauren was facing decades now, not months. But Casey immediately brought me back to earth. She sat me down in her office, the scent of coffee and urgency filling the space. "Her defense attorney will come at you hard now," she warned. "They'll attack your military service, your parenting, your time overseas. They'll say you were neglectful, that you created this situation. We started doing practice sessions." Casey would grill me like I was on the witness stand, her voice sharp. Her questions designed to provoke and confuse. "Isn't it true you were more married to the military than to your family? Did you ever stop to think that leaving your son with his father and a virtual stranger was a recipe for disaster? "You're trained to assess threats, Sergeant. Why didn't you see this one?" She made me answer the same questions over and over until I could do it without my voice shaking, without tears of frustration and guilt welling up. She was building an armor around me, and the process was brutally painful. Through it all, updates on Tommy were a balm. His foster family, through CPS, reported he was doing better. The nightmares were less frequent. He was drawing pictures that weren't just black scribbles. They were committed to him. They'd even mentioned the A word, adoption, if Conrad's rights were terminated. Ben started a new community service, placement at a domestic violence shelter downtown. He sorted donations and cleaned the playroom. The coordinator told me that being there, seeing other kids who had been hurt and were healing, seemed to help him understand he wasn't alone. In helping them, he was helping himself. One night, after I'd finally gotten both boys to sleep, Ben in his bed, Tommy on a cot in Ben's room, where he felt safe, I sat at the kitchen table. It was covered in a paper avalanche, legal bills from Casey that made my stomach clench. Therapy schedules, court dates circled in red, CPS reports, a life measured in paperwork and pain. But as I sat there in the quiet, I realized something. The case would drag on for months more. There would be depositions, hearings, more evaluations. The cost would be staggering. The emotional toll was incalculable. But tonight, my son was sleeping down the hall. He wasn't in juvenile detention. Tommy was in a home where he was protected and loved. They were safe. They were healing. It wasn't justice yet, but it was safety. And after everything, that had to be enough. For now, it was everything. The quiet of the kitchen was a blanket, heavy and soft. I sat amidst the paper chaos, each document a breadcrumb, leading through the forest of our nightmare. The legal bills were a stark, numerical representation of our pain. The therapy schedules were maps of our healing. The court dates were battles yet to be fought. But in that moment, the only thing that mattered was the sound of silence from down the hall. 2 boys, breathing in sleep, safe. That fragile peace was shattered by a phone call from Casey the next morning. Her voice was tight, a wire stretched to its breaking point. The defense filed a motion. They're claiming the photos are inadmissible, fruit of the poisonous tree. They're arguing Ben had no right to... She paused, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. To document the situation in that manner, I felt the old familiar rage ignite in my chest. He was gathering evidence of his own abuse. "I know," Casey said, her voice weary, "and we'll fight it. But it means a hearing. It means Ben might have to testify about how he took them, the state of mind he was in. It's a brutal tactic. They want to re-traumatize him on the stand, to scare us into backing down." The game was changing. Lauren's lawyer was getting desperate, and desperate people fought dirty. We were no longer just presenting facts. We were preparing for psychological warfare. The hearing was a sterile, brutal affair. Lauren's lawyer, a man whose name I refused to learn, painted Ben as a tech-savvy, calculating teenager who had orchestrated a complex plot to frame his stepmother. He used words like entrapment and invasion of privacy. Casey stood her ground. "Your Honor, these are not images obtained by a stranger. These are a minor's contemporaneous documentation of his own sexual assault. They are a diary of abuse. To exclude them is to silence the victim twice over." The judge, a different one from the restraining order hearing, listened intently. He was younger, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. He took the motion under advisement. We wouldn't know his decision for weeks. The waiting was a special kind of torture. Every day I looked at Ben, wondering if I'd have to prepare him to walk into that courtroom and have his most private horrors picked apart by a man in a suit. Meanwhile, the tendrils of Lauren's past continued to unfurl. A detective from Michigan called Casey. One of the names in the old therapy records had been tracked down. A young man, now 19. He was willing to talk. He'd been 12 when Lauren babysat him. His story was a chilling echo of Ben's. The special secrets, the threats, the isolation. His family had moved away, too ashamed and scared to press charges. They'd buried it, just like Conrad's family had tried to do. The pattern was no longer just a theory. It was a chain of broken boys, stretching back years. Casey forwarded the detective's report to the prosecutor. Each new victim strengthened our case, but also carved a deeper hole in my soul. How many others were there? How many boys had their lives quietly fractured by this woman, while adults looked the other way? The weight of it pressed down on me. I started having my own nightmares, not of the courtroom or the lawyers, but of faceless boys, standing in a line, their eyes accusing me. Why didn't you stop her sooner? My therapy sessions, which I'd finally started, became a lifeline. You're taking on guilt that isn't yours to carry, my therapist said, her voice calm. You are not her first victim. You are her first obstacle. There's a difference. The distinction was a small raft in a stormy sea. Conrad, in his own therapy, was unraveling. The full weight of his failure was crashing down on him. He showed up at one of our supervised visits at the CPS office, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at me. He looked at Ben. I'm sorry, he said, the words raw and stripped bare. I was so desperate to be happy. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to believe that I could be so stupid. Ben looked at his father, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything. He just gave a single slow nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement. A door cracked open, just a sliver. Tommy, seeing his father so broken, ran over and hugged his legs. Conrad sank to his knees, burying his face in Tommy's shoulder, his body shaking with silent sobs. It was the first real, unguarded emotion I'd seen from him through this entire ordeal. It was the beginning of his penance. The legal machinery ground on. Depositions were scheduled. I spent a full day in a room with a court reporter and Lauren's lawyer, being questioned for 6 exhausting hours. Casey objecting every few minutes, protecting me from the worst of the baiting questions. Then it was Ben's turn. He was deposed for 2 hours. Casey and I waited outside, unable to protect him. When he emerged, he was pale but upright. He looked at me and said, I told the truth, Mom. All of it. The pride in his voice was the strongest thing I'd felt in months. The judge finally ruled on the photos. We won. They were admissible. The victory felt hollow, though. The fight to simply have his truth heard had taken almost as much out of Ben as the abuse itself. The trial date was set. 8 months away. The prosecutor warned us it would be a media circus. Lauren's story, the beautiful bride attacked by her stepson, had already captured public attention. The truth was uglier, messier, and less sensational. We began the grim work of trial preparation. Casey hired a jury consultant. We pored over profiles, trying to predict who would believe a teenage boy over a weeping woman. It felt cynical and awful, reducing our truth to a game of perception. Through it all, life insisted on happening. Ben got his driver's permit. Tommy lost a tooth. We had good days, moments of pure, normal joy that felt stolen and precious. We'd be laughing at a movie, and for a few minutes we'd forget. Then one of us would get a text from Casey, or a call from a therapist, and the shadow would fall again. One afternoon, I was cleaning out my rental car, a monument to my transient life, when I found it, tucked under the passenger seat, a small origami dinosaur. Tommy must have made it. I held it in my hand, this perfect, delicate thing, a testament to the creativity and resilience of a little boy who had every reason to be broken. I sat on the curb and cried, not tears of sadness or anger, but of a fierce, overwhelming love. This was why we were fighting. This fragile, beautiful hope. This refusal to be destroyed. The trial would be a battle. The outcome was uncertain, but holding that paper dinosaur, I knew we'd already won the most important thing. We had each other, and we were still standing. The monster had tried to break us. She had failed. Now we just had to make sure she could never try again. The paper dinosaur sat on my dashboard, a tiny sentinel of hope. It was a reminder that amidst the legal briefs and the trauma reports, there was still a 9-year-old boy who folded paper into joy. I clung to that. But the world outside our fragile bubble was preparing for a spectacle. The trial date, now circled in blood red on my calendar, loomed like a storm cloud. The prosecutor's warning about a media circus proved devastatingly accurate. It started with a local news segment. Wedding day assault, self-defense or savage attack. The headline was designed to inflame, not inform. They used Lauren's wedding photo, her face radiant, pristine. Before my son's fist had rewritten her story, they showed a grainy, distant shot of Ben, leaving our lawyer's office. His head down, a hoodie pulled tight around his face. They'd already cast their characters. The beautiful victim, the brutish aggressor. Casey went into overdrive. She held a press conference, her voice cutting through the drizzle outside the courthouse. This is not a story about a wedding. This is a story about a serial child predator and the boy who fought back to protect his brother. We will be presenting evidence of a pattern of abuse that spans a decade. Her words were strong, but they were a pebble against the tsunami of sensationalism. Online, the comments sections were a sewer. People dissected Ben's appearance, my parenting, Conrad's weakness. The story was a Rorschach test, and everyone saw their own biases. The pressure took its toll. Ben's hard-won calm began to fracture. He started skipping his community service. I found him one afternoon, sitting in the dark in his room. Not drawing, not reading, just staring at the wall. They think I'm a monster, he said, his voice flat. They don't know anything, and they hate me. It was the helplessness that was killing him. The feeling that his truth was being drowned out by a simpler, juicier narrative. The only way out was through. We had to win in court. The depositions intensified. Lauren's family was deposed. Her mother, under oath, admitted she knew about the incident in Michigan. She called it a misunderstanding. She claimed they'd gotten Lauren help. Her father, a broken man, confirmed they'd moved to bury it. Their testimony was a damning confession of enabling, but their lawyer spun it as a story of a family, desperately trying to help a troubled daughter. Then, it was time for Lauren's deposition. She arrived with her legal team, dressed not in courtroom formality, but in a soft beige sweater set, her hair pulled back gently. She looked fragile, meek, the perfect victim. She answered questions in a quiet, trembling voice, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She denied everything. The photos were faked. The boys were confused. Ben had a crush on her and had become violent when she rebuffed his advances. Tommy was just parroting what his brother had told him. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She was calm, consistent, and utterly convincing in her lies. I sat in the corner of the room, my hands clenched so tight. My nails left half-moon impressions in my palms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to launch myself across the table and shake the truth out of her. Casey remained ice cold. She methodically took Lauren through her story, pointing out inconsistencies, poking holes in her timeline. But Lauren was prepared. She'd had months to rehearse. The most chilling moment came when Casey presented her with the evidence from the other victim in Michigan. Lauren's mask didn't slip. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at the paper, then back at Casey, with a look of profound sadness. "That poor boy," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "He must have been so confused. I was just trying to be a friend to him." I felt the air leave the room. She wasn't just lying. She was reframing her entire history of predation as misunderstood kindness. It was genius, and it was evil. After the deposition, Casey was quiet. "She's good," she finally said, swirling the coffee in her cup. Really good. The jury will want to believe her. She looks the part. Ben. He looks like an angry teenage boy. We have our work cut out for us. The psychological warfare escalated. Source close to the defense. Began leaking details to the press. Twisted, half-true details that made us look worse. Stories appeared about my temper, my lengthy absences, my acrimonious divorce. They were painting a picture of a neglectful mother who had raised a violent son. The goal was clear: make the jury doubt us before we even set foot in the courtroom. The strain was unbearable. Tommy's nightmares returned with a vengeance. Ben retreated into a sullen silence. My therapy sessions were now the only place I could let the mask of strength slip completely. One night I broke. It was after a long day of meeting with the jury consultant, a man who talked about demographics and empathy factors, as if my son's life were a marketing campaign. I sat on the floor of my shower, the hot water scalding my skin, and I sobbed. I cried for my son's stolen innocence. I cried for Tommy's terror. I cried for my dead career. I cried from the sheer exhaustion of fighting a monster who seemed to have endless resources and no conscience. I didn't know if we were strong enough to win. The legal battle felt like trying to punch a ghost. For every step we took, Lauren's defense had a new strategy, a new lie, a new way to smear us. I got out of the shower, my eyes raw, my body numb. I checked on the boys. Ben was asleep, his face finally relaxed, looking like the child he still was. Tommy was in the cot beside him, one small hand clutching Ben's t-shirt, as if afraid he'd disappear. I stood in the doorway, watching them. The rage and despair began to recede, replaced by a colder, harder emotion. Resolve. This wasn't just about winning a trial anymore. It was about endurance. It was about outlasting her. It was about being the last one standing when the lies were finally exhausted. She thought she could break us with lawyers and media leaks. She thought her performance could outweigh our truth. But she had underestimated a mother's love. She had underestimated a brother's loyalty. She had underestimated the sheer, stubborn will of a family that had already survived hell. The trial would be the battlefield, but the war for our souls had already been won. In the quiet of a bedroom, where two brothers slept, protecting each other from the monsters, both real and imagined, we were ready. The morning of the trial dawned grey and cold, a fitting blanket for the day. I dressed with a soldier's precision, a simple, dark blue suit, no jewelry, my hair pulled back severely. I was not there to be a personality. I was there to be a fact, a monument to the truth. The courthouse was a circus. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical flowers, seeking a poisonous sun. Reporters jostled on the steps. Microphones thrust forward, their voices a cacophonous buzz. We entered through a side door, a small procession of wounded souls. Me, Ben, Casey, and a victim's advocate from the prosecutor's office. The courtroom was all dark wood and solemn silence, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. It smelled of lemon polish and old anxiety. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table. Ben sat between me and Casey, his posture rigid, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He was wearing a suit he'd outgrown, a subtle reminder to the jury that he was still just a boy. Then she entered, Lauren, dressed in a soft, dove-grey dress, her face free of the dramatic makeup she'd worn in depositions. She looked pale, subdued, almost saintly. She didn't look at us. She took her seat at the defense table. Her head bowed slightly, the picture of contrite dignity. Her performance had begun. The jury filed in. 12 strangers. I studied their faces, trying to read them. An older man with kind eyes. A young woman who wouldn't look up. A middle-aged man with arms crossed. They were a cipher. Our lives were in their hands. The prosecutor began his opening statement. He was calm, methodical. He laid out the timeline, the facts. He spoke of a predator who groomed a child, and when that child tried to speak, was silenced by the adults who should have protected him. He talked about the photos, the medical reports, the pattern of behavior that stretched back years. He called Ben courageous. He called Lauren's actions a calculated betrayal of trust. Then it was the defense's turn. Lauren's lawyer painted a different picture, a picture of a lonely boy with a violent streak, a boy infatuated with his beautiful stepmother, a boy who, when rejected, had flown into a jealous rage and concocted a horrific story to cover his crime. He called the wedding day assault savage. He called Ben's story a fantasy. He implied I had coached him, a desperate attempt by an absent mother to win back her ex-husband. I felt Ben flinch beside me at the word fantasy. I put my hand over his. A silent message. I am here. I believe you. The first witness was the responding officer. He described the scene, the blood on the driveway, the chaotic living room, Lauren's injuries. Under cross-examination, the defense lawyer pressed him. Did the boy seem remorseful? The officer hesitated. He seemed resolved. The next few days were a blur of technical testimony. The digital forensic expert, Corey, took the stand. He explained in clear, simple terms how he'd found the spoofing app on Lauren's phone. Installed at 11:47 p.m. on the night of the wedding, he showed the jury side-by-side comparisons of the fake text messages, pointing out the wrong font, the inconsistent timestamps. He played the fake voice memo, then broke it down on a spectral analyzer, showing the jury the digital seams where my voice had been spliced and forged. It was powerful, scientific, and utterly damning, but Lauren's lawyer fought back. He tried to paint Corey as a hired gun, someone we'd paid to tell a story. Isn't it true, he sneered, that your analysis can be manipulated to show whatever your client wants? Corey didn't flinch. The data is the data, sir. It doesn't have an agenda. Then it was time for the testimony we'd all been dreading. The testimony from the other victim. A young man named David, now 19, walked to the stand. He was tall, lanky, visibly nervous. He wouldn't look at Lauren. He told his story in a halting voice. He'd been 12. Lauren was his babysitter. The special games, the secrets, the same script, word for word, that she'd used on Ben. Lauren's lawyer objecting, trying to have the testimony thrown out as prejudicial. The judge overruled him. It speaks to pattern and intent, he said, his voice firm. David's testimony was a gut punch to the defense's fantasy narrative. Here was a stranger, from another state, telling the same story. The jury was listening now, really listening. I saw the kind-eyed older man glance at Lauren, his expression hardening. Then the defense called their witnesses. Lauren's parents took the stand, parroting the story of a misunderstanding. They were nervous, their eyes darting around. They weren't convincing. A character witness, a friend of Lauren's, testified to her kindness and love of children. It felt hollow, scripted. And then it was time. The defense called Conrad. He walked to the stand, a shell of the arrogant man I'd been married to. He looked diminished, ashamed. He confirmed the timeline. Yes, Ben had come to him. Yes, he had dismissed it. Under questioning from Lauren's lawyer, he tried to explain his blindness. I was in love. I didn't want to see it. But then Casey stood up for cross-examination. She didn't attack him. She spoke softly. Mr. Evans, when you look at your son now, what do you see? Conrad's composure broke. He looked at Ben, and his face crumpled. A tear traced a path down his cheek. I see my failure, he choked out. I see the bravest person I've ever known, and I see that I failed him. I failed them both. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said. The courtroom was utterly silent. The jury watched, captivated. Lauren's lawyer had called Conrad to bolster her image. Instead, he'd given the jury a first-hand account of her manipulation and his own devastating regret. The trial stretched into a second week. The evidence was overwhelming. The pattern was clear, but Lauren's performance was relentless. On the stand, she was a masterpiece of calculated victimhood. She cried. She spoke softly about her love for Conrad, her desire to be a good stepmother. She looked directly at the jury, her eyes wide and pleading. "I would never hurt a child," she whispered. "I love children. All I ever wanted was a family." For a moment, I saw it. I saw how a jury could want to believe her. She offered a simple, comfortable lie. Our truth was ugly and complicated. The final day of testimony arrived. The defense rested. The prosecution had one last witness. They called Ben. He walked to the stand, back straight, head high. He looked young and impossibly brave in his too small suit. He swore to tell the truth, his voice clear. The prosecutor led him gently through his story. He didn't rush him. He let Ben tell it in his own words. And Ben did. He spoke quietly, but with a devastating clarity. He described the fear, the shame, the isolation. He talked about catching her with Tommy. He talked about the wedding morning, begging his father. He talked about the moment he realized no one was coming to save them, so he had to save them himself. He never raised his voice. He never cried. His testimony was all the more powerful for its quiet dignity. Then, it was the defense's turn. Lauren's lawyer approached, a shark smelling blood. He tried to trip Ben up. He questioned his memory. He implied he was lying. He tried to provoke him into anger. "Isn't it true you were jealous of your father's relationship with Lauren? Isn't it true you have a history of violence? Did your mother tell you what to say?" Ben took a deep breath. He looked the lawyer directly in the eye, and then he slowly turned his gaze to the jury. "You can believe whatever you want about me," he said, his voice steady. "I don't care if you think I'm a monster, but look at my brother." He pointed to Tommy, sitting in the front row, clutching his origami dinosaur. "He's 9. He still has nightmares. He's afraid of the dark. Believe what you want about me, but please, believe him. Please protect him." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the lights. The lawyer, stunned into silence, had no more questions. Ben had done it. He hadn't defended himself. He'd defended his brother. And in doing so, he had shown the jury the heart of a protector, not a predator. He stepped down from the stand and walked back to our table. He didn't look at Lauren. He didn't look at the jury. He sat down and I put my arm around him. He was trembling. The closing arguments were a formality. The evidence was laid bare. The choice was clear. Believe the complicated, painful truth of a fractured family, or believe the simple, comfortable lie of a beautiful stranger. The jury was sent to deliberate. The waiting began. The jury was out. Time didn't just slow down. It congealed. We were moved to a small airless room. Me, Ben, Casey, the victim's advocate. There was a pitcher of water nobody touched. A clock on the wall ticked each second with a deafening metallic finality. Ben sat perfectly still, staring at a scuff mark on the linoleum floor. I held his hand, his fingers ice cold in mine. Casey paced, her heels clicking a nervous rhythm. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Our truth had been laid bare. The evidence was overwhelming. But we'd seen juries believe stranger things. We'd seen Lauren's performance. An hour passed. Then two. My mind tormented me with every possibility. What if just one juror believed her? What if they thought Ben was just a violent kid? What if they decided it was a he said, she said, and let her walk? The not guilty verdict would destroy him. It would destroy us all. I thought of Tommy, safe with Sarah, probably coloring at her kitchen table, unaware that his future was being decided in this stuffy room. I thought of the other boy, David, from Michigan, whose own unfinished justice was tied to ours. After 3 hours, there was a knock on the door. A bailiff. The jury has reached a verdict. The walk back into the courtroom was the longest of my life. The air was charged, electric. Lauren was already at her table, her back rod straight, her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't turn around. The jury filed in. Their faces were unreadable. No one would meet my eye. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trying to escape a cage. The judge spoke. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? A woman in the front row, the one with the kind eyes, stood up. We have, Your Honor. She was handed a slip of paper. She passed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. He read it, his expression giving nothing away. He passed it back. The foreperson took the paper. She took a breath. The entire courtroom leaned forward, holding its breath. On the count of aggravated sexual assault of a minor, Benjamin Evans, we find the defendant, Lauren Evans, guilty. A gasp went through the room. I squeezed Ben's hand so hard I must have hurt him. The foreperson continued, her voice gaining strength. On the count of sexual assault of a minor, Thomas Evans, guilty. On the count of sexual assault of a minor, David Miller, guilty. On the count of witness tampering, guilty. On the count of fabricating evidence, guilty. On and on it went. A litany of guilt. A symphony of justice. Each guilty was a hammer blow, shattering the beautiful, fragile lie Lauren had built. I looked at her. The performance was over. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking waxy and small. Her shoulders slumped. The mask of victimhood had finally cracked, and underneath was nothing but a hollow, empty shell. When the foreperson finished, the judge set a date for sentencing. He remanded Lauren into custody immediately. The bailiffs moved forward, clicking handcuffs around her wrists. The sound was sharp, final. She didn't look at anyone as they led her away. There was no celebration in the courtroom. No cheers. Just a profound, exhausted silence. It was over. Ben let out a shuddering breath, a sound he seemed to have been holding for a year. He turned to me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw the weight lift from his eyes. He didn't smile. He just rested his forehead against my shoulder, and I felt his entire body go limp with relief. The sentencing hearing was a month later. This time, we were allowed to speak. Victim impact statements. Conrad went first. He stood at the podium, his voice thick with emotion. He apologized to Ben, to Tommy, to me. He took full responsibility for his failure. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just asked for a chance to do better. Then it was Ben's turn. He walked to the podium, taller now, more sure. He didn't have notes. He looked directly at Lauren, who sat expressionless in her orange jumpsuit. I don't hate you, he said, his voice clear and strong in the silent room. I pity you. You tried to take my childhood, my safety, my family, but you failed. You made me stronger. You showed me what kind of man I don't want to be, and you showed me that the truth, no matter how hard it is to tell, will always win. He sat down. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. I didn't speak. My son had said everything that needed to be said. The judge sentenced Lauren to 45 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 30. She would be an old woman, when and if she ever saw freedom again. It was a life sentence for her victims. Now it was one for her too. We walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight. The reporters were there, but their voices were different now. Respectful, somber. We didn't stop. We got into our car and drove away. The healing wasn't instantaneous. Healing isn't a switch you flip. It's a road you walk, every day. Ben finished his community service. The animal shelter offered him a part-time job. He took it. He found solace in the unconditional love of creatures who asked no questions. Tommy's nightmares didn't stop overnight, but they became less frequent. He started sleeping in his own bed. He taught me how to fold an origami crane. Conrad threw himself into his therapy and his parenting classes. Our relationship was forever changed, scarred. But we found a new way to be a family, for the sake of our children. He became the father he should have been all along. My military career was over. The reprimand stood, but I found a new purpose. I started working with a non-profit that helps military families navigate the CPS and legal systems. My nightmare became my manual for helping others. One afternoon, months after the trial, I was in the backyard with Ben. He was home from work, playing with a new rescue dog from the shelter. A skittish little thing that was finally learning to trust. He looked at me, a real easy smile on his face. "I'm okay, Mom," he said, as if reading my mind. "I'm really gonna be okay," and I finally believed him. This story wasn't about a wedding. It wasn't about a punch. It was about the silence that surrounds abuse and the devastating cost of that silence. It was about the incredible courage it takes to speak a truth that no one wants to hear. And it was about the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son, a bond that no monster, no lie, no courtroom could ever break. The world is full of monsters, but it is also full of brave boys who become brave men. It is full of mothers who will cross oceans and fight dragons for their children. And in the end, that light, no matter how small, will always, always defeat the dark.